Understanding genetic diversity. To understand genetic diversity, we must understand the so-called African, and to understand the African is to understand humanity. Due diligence. Man has tried over and over again to try and define himself in a world that came with no instructions. So for millennia, man have created their own creation myths in order to get to the business of manning, creating civilizations, that is. With these creation stories come the ideology of how to arrange themselves in society. Let's take a look at some of the ways that men from the past have chosen to order themselves. 300 BC, the Greeks. With the Platonic Aristotelian view posited that man and the way society is structured is a mere reflection of the world of forms, which is the true reality where immutable and transcendent entities exist independently of the physical world. Plato conceived of a hierarchical structure within the realm of forms, with the form of the good occupying the highest position. The form of the good is the source of all other forms and provides the ultimate standard of truth, beauty, and morality. Plato uses the hierarchical social structure as a means to establish harmony and order within the ideal state. Each class is assigned specific roles and duties based on their abilities and natures, with the aim of promoting the common good and maintaining social stability. The philosopher kings, who possess wisdom and virtue, are entrusted with governing the state, while the warrior class ensures its defense and protection, and the producers fulfill the material needs of society. Aristotle believed in a natural hierarchy where everything has its place and function. Just as there are rulers and subjects in nature, e.g. the soul ruling the body, he posited that human society also has a natural order, where some are meant to rule and others to be ruled. In Metaphysics and On the Soul. In these texts, Aristotle discusses his ideas about the hierarchical structure of nature, with beings arranged in a graded scale from lowest to highest, reflecting their degree of perfection and complexity. This concept depicted the universe as a hierarchical structure, with God at the top, followed by angels, humans, animals, plants, and inanimate objects, each occupying a specific place in the cosmic order based on their degree of perfection and complexity. This framework was used to explain various aspects of the natural world, human society, and the relationship between God and creation. So, while Aristotle himself did not explicitly formulate the concept of the great chain of being as it is understood in later periods, his ideas provided the philosophical foundation upon which later scholars built this concept and attributed it to him. Aristotle presented his theory of natural slavery primarily in his work Politics, Book 1. He argued that some people are naturally suited to be slaves, while others are naturally suited to be masters, and that the distinction between slaves and free people lies in their rational capacity. He claimed that natural slaves lack the rational foresight necessary to govern. He suggested that the master-slave relationship is mutually beneficial. The master benefits from the labor and service of the slave, while the slave benefits from the master's rational direction and provision of necessities. Does this sound and feel familiar? 400 to 1500 AD, the Church era, the Middle Ages. The Church's position is the same in principle as the Platonic Aristotelian paradigm. The Church believed that a benevolent supernatural God dwelling in a non-physical eternal paradise is the source of everything physical and non-physical, and morality stemmed from him, and he was the head of this hierarchy from which man descended, to whom God gave dominion over the earth and beast. 1600 to 1900, rise of pseudoscience. Scientific racism is the idea that race is biological and that there's a natural hierarchy amongst racial groups, and white people are at the top, substantiated by an array of pseudoscientific methods and theories, but essentially the same in principle as the Church and the Greeks. While trying to create society, it seems man from every culture have been looking for some objective means to establish some kind of legitimate hierarchy through nature to qualify and classify status in our hierarchical societies? Is there some objective quality in a group of men that is advantageous over another group substantially? Or is this a strategy that predatory, narcissistic, ego-driven men use as a tool to create power and control over unsuspecting groups? As you can see in the past, man has used a variety of methods to try to create some kind of legit hierarchy, whether it be sanctioned by God, the king, queen, and even by science. In the present, we still struggle with these outdated concepts and ideas of classism and status today. Let's take a look at what science today has to say about biological advantages in populations. Out of Africa, the cradle of humanity. Fossil and genetic evidence indicates that modern humans evolved in Africa about 200,000 years ago, possibly as early as 300,000 years. Although several geographic regions have been proposed as potential birthplaces of our species, there is now growing evidence to support the view that our species probably evolved within structured populations, connected to each other by gene flow across the whole African continent. Thus, Africa has witnessed modern human evolution for much longer than anywhere else. The African continent is also the source of the massive demographic event, known as the Out of Africa dispersal, which began around 60 to 100,000 years ago and spread individuals and their genes outside Africa and throughout the world. Whether present-day people outside Africa descend from a single or multiple founding populations, as well as the timing and routes of their dispersal, are still very much debated. Nonetheless, the signatures of our recent African origin persist in our genomes today. As modern humans dispersed from Africa, probably in small populations, they experienced a dramatic bottleneck. Consequently, African populations today harbor more genetic diversity than any other population in the world, and the genetic diversity found in non-Africans represents only a subset of that found in Africa. Genetics. Genetics has been invaluable in understanding this past. While hominin fossils hinted that Africa was the birthplace of humanity, it was genetics that proved this to be so. Patterns of genetic variation, how similar or different people's DNA sequences are, have not only shown that most of the diversity we see in humans today is present within Africa, but also that there are fewer differences within populations the further you get from Africa. What does this mean, and why does this matter? Think of a species with huge genetic diversity like a hardware store that contains all the tools, equipment, and materials needed for almost every situation. A species with very little genetic diversity is more of a basic toolbox with some tools available to them. Some can be used to fix a problem, but they may not be perfect for the job. Or worse, none of the tools they have are suitable for the jobs they're needed for. Having a variety of characteristics allows a species to survive diseases, environmental changes, and ecosystem stresses, because some individuals may possess certain traits that allow them to overcome such impacts of change. Individuals may die out, but the species will survive. Since Africans have the highest genetic diversity, this means that the pool of potential traits, biologically, phenotypically, and even resistance or susceptibility to diseases, is broader in African populations than those who descended from smaller, less diverse populations. Genetic diversity as a euphemism, survival of the fittest. So there you have it. Man's quest to find out who is naturally of a higher quality is finished. I hope I did not offend, or maybe you would like a euphemism instead? Fine. Let's look at what Darwin meant with the phrase, survival of the fittest. Herbert Spencer first used the phrase after reading Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species in his Principles of Biology, in which he drew parallels between his own economic theories and Darwin's biological ones. Quote, "This survival of the fittest, which I have here sought to express in mechanical terms, is that which Mr. Darwin has called natural selection, or the preservation of favored races in the struggle for life." End quote. Darwin responded positively to Alfred Russel Wallace's suggestion of using Spencer's new phrase, survival of the fittest, as an alternative to natural selection, and adopted the phrase in The Variation of Animals and Plants Under Domestication. In On the Origin of Species, he introduced the phrase intending it to mean better designed for an immediate local environment. How about the phrase genetic diversity itself? Isn't it a euphemism? I mean, really. If you think about what it really means, it's just a nice way of saying Africans are genetically superior than others. I know that's a taboo thing to say, but you would have to agree. If science found out that white people, for example, were better suited for the planet or more genetically diverse, it would be on the front page of every scientific journal, magazine, and newspaper, being that's what they have always proclaimed in some shape or fashion. It is easy to surmise this. All we have to do is look to the past. Did the Greek not profess to be biologically greater than others? Did the US not put into law that people of African descent were not fully human? Did the church not put themselves at the top of the hierarchy because God gave them the commandments and seen others as infidels, Gentiles, or Goyim? We could go on the various ways men have tried to justify supremacy in one way or another. But as I asked earlier, is there an objective means to establish some kind of legitimate hierarchy through nature?